Good morning. From China's perspective, the recently concluded one-day Shanghai Cooperation Organization or the SCO summit under the presidency of India held in a virtual mode was a total failure. And China matters because China and Russia are not only the founding members of the SCO, they are also the force behind the SCO. Now, before I get to the summit and explain why it was a failure, we need to understand a bit of a background or the context. So let me start from there. And the start point of the context has to be the Belt and Road Initiative, which is the pet project of Chinese President Xi Jinping, and he first articulated this in 2013. Belt and Road Initiative is looking at two objectives, two outcomes, which complement one another. It is looking at common prosperity. That means it is looking at economic development through connectivity and infrastructure building. And then it is looking at the other objective, cooperative security. Because after all, when there is prosperity, when the Chinese are also involved, they have built their infrastructure there, Chinese people are there, their security matters, their interests matter. So in a cooperative mode with the BRI nation, the PLA or whatever the Chinese forces will work with the security forces of that nation in a way that it complements or supports one another. It's a win-win for both sides. It's not a zero-sum game. That means one does not gain at the cost of the other. So this is the whole concept of the BRI. Now, in 2017, Xi Jinping came up with a subset of the BRI. The original BRI articulated in 2013 was about physical infrastructure building, which included roads, ports, powerhouses, all those things, everything physical. In 2017, he spoke of the digital Silk Road, which is about cyberspace. Cyberspace hardware connectivity and cyberspace software connectivity. Now, hardware connectivity is about the third industrial revolution, and the hardware it needs is the fiber optic cables for the land, the subsea or the submarine cables for the sea, and to be helped and supported by Chinese Beidou satellite constellation. That is the hardware connectivity. Now, the software connectivity is about artificial intelligence and big data, and it will usher the BRI nation into the fourth industrial revolution, where things are done. That means the industries work in a far efficient way and in an entirely different way with good results. And this is something that perhaps will be accomplished by 2030, the end of this decade. Now, alongside it so happened that in 2015, the United Nations announced 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Now, these goals were about providing better education, alleviating poverty, a healthier world, a better world, a greener world. All these things were encapsulated in the 17 development goals of the UN, and they said these need to be finished in 15 years' time by 2030. This was the goal. China approached the UN and said that, look, as part of our national sustainable development goals, we are doing precisely the goals that the UN has articulated. So UN studied their case and endorsed the BRI. That means now China became a big force behind the UN 17 sustainable goals. And these are the goals where already majority of the 139 nations of global south have endorsed. They are part of this. They have liked this idea of the sustainable development goals. Therefore, in 2021, because China was now the leading power in this, Xi Jinping came up with the acronym Global Development Initiative. Now, Global Development Initiative is nothing more than a BRI which is boosted. The BRI, the nations which are not on board the BRI which have not signed for the BRI, yet they are looking at prosperity from the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So the Global Development Initiative was basically meant for them, for the common prosperity of those people. That was the whole idea. And next year in 2022, same way as he had done for the BRI, he came up with another acronym, which is the Global Security Initiative, again at the global level, working under the United Nations, how to give cooperative security framework in a win-win situation the country should get. And SCO is part of that. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is basically the global security initiative of the Chinese, completely backed by the Russians. And as I said, as far as the Global Development Initiative was concerned for the common prosperity, what the Chinese had were the BRICS nations. BRICS, as we know, is the Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. These are the emerging economies. And what they have now is they are emerging economies and they are supported by two banks. One is the BRICS Bank, which is also called the New Development Bank, and then there is AIIB, which is the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. That means the projects which are basically which could be of the emerging, the BRICS nation, or the projects outside that which are not being funded by, let's say, the traditional organizations like the IMF and the World Bank, they could be considered by these two banks. Basically creating a parallel structure. This is what has been created, and they complement one another, the SCO and the BRICS. Now, with this background, let us now look at the summit. As we know, India became a full member in 2017 along with Pakistan, and this was the first presidency. And what did Prime Minister Modi do? As far as India is concerned, it rejected the two key things which were endorsed by all the other SCO nations. And the first was India did not sign on the Economic Development Strategy 2030 because it said there is a Chinese phraseology here, things like Global Development Initiative. But the real reason behind this was that India believes that it can be the voice, and it has said so in so many terms because it sees itself as a rival in a multipolar world to China. So it believes that it can be the voice of the global south with support from the G20 nations, the other presidency that India holds this year. Now G20, as we know, evolved from G7, which is the industrialized economy led by America. So now India believes that it will not endorse something which has China in it for common prosperity, and it can do this thing on its own. And yet it is part of the SCO. Now the second thing which it has consistently not endorsed but has been endorsed by all the other members of the SCO is the Belt and Road Initiative, because Indians make two arguments. One, they say, basically picking this argument from the Americans, that this is a debt trap, the BRI. Notwithstanding the fact that 149 nations have already endorsed BRI, and 54 African nations, 49 out of the 54 African nations, they are on board the BRI. And except for India and Bhutan in South Asia, all the other countries, they are on board the BRI. The other argument made by India is that, look, as far as BRI is concerned, the flagship project of the BRI, the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, it goes through POK, which is the disputed territory, which actually belongs to us, and it will come back to us one day, which of course will never happen. It is an impossible task. So the real reason why it does not want to endorse this is something entirely different. Because if it endorses that, that means if India gets in a cooperative mode with the Chinese, it will have to accept willy-nilly the leadership of China for the simple reason that the Chinese have deeper pockets, much deep pockets, and they are the world leaders in infrastructure development. India will not match up to the China in this area, so this is the reason. So what did Prime Minister Modi do or India do? Instead of the connectivity which has been endorsed by all the SCO nations, Prime Minister spoke about the Chabahar port. Iran, as we all know, has now become the 9th full member of the SCO at this summit. So he spoke about Chabahar port. He spoke about the international north-south transport corridor, basically bypassing Pakistan, bypassing China, looking at the Central Asian republics, looking at Iran, Russia and India. Now the point is, how far will Iran go with India and not go with the SCO, not go with Russia, not go with China? I don't think is even debatable. The answer is very obvious. But this is the position India took. Next, India spoke very vociferously on terrorism, basically terrorism emanating from Pakistan. Now the point is, terrorism is a strategy. It is a military strategy of Pakistan, which unfortunately has been successful since 1990, 33 years. India should have seen that it did not succeed by building up credibility military capabilities. If India had credible capabilities for war, Pakistan military or Pakistan army would have been compelled to review its strategy of cross-border terrorism. But there was no need for them to do that. And the other reason is that since the Modi government came to power in October 2014, and in his first address as Prime Minister to the Combined Commanders Conference, Modi made it very clear that your key task will be counter-terror operations. So carry on with that. That means if that is the key task endorsed by the government, just forget about building the capabilities for war. And that is where we stand on terrorism. Now, the last thing rather is about the protocol. Xi Jinping had personally told when he last met Prime Minister Modi that China will support India's presidency of SCO and the G20 fully. And it is obvious to anybody that for India, this SCO has been the key presidency. I mean, there is so much of media blitz, there's so much of talk of the G20 and what India can do for the G20 and for the global south, and nothing about the SCO at all. It's a complete blank. So much so that because Prime Minister Modi was going to America, and this was a landmark visit, the first state visit of Modi to America, India decided to make it into a virtual mode because obviously Modi is not very keen to personally meet Xi Jinping. And Xi Jinping would have definitely come for the simple reason that it is their baby. He's the force behind the SCO. Now, so it did not happen. Now, the next thing is that coming to the relations, I want to just leave this point here about the relations between India and China now, the bilateral relations after the visit of Prime Minister Modi's state visit to America. I see no possibility at all, and this is perhaps the conclusion that the Chinese will also draw, of normalization of relations. And for the simple reason that India has signed this ship repair agreement with the Americans, which basically means in a step-by-step way. I will make a separate video on Prime Minister Modi's visit to America, but here I just want to leave with the conclusion, and the conclusion is that eventually what the Americans are hoping to get from India, perhaps by the end of the decade, is de facto military base in our shipyards, in all the shipyards and dockyards except Vizag, because Vizag is where the Russians are, where our nuclear assets are. So that is what we are looking at, and this is called losing your strategic autonomy when you are not even a military ally of the Americans. And the Chinese had repeatedly been saying, their analysts, that the basis of India-China relation is India maintaining, rather both countries maintaining their strategic autonomy. So the beginning of the loss of India's strategic autonomy has begun. So that is where we are. That means the efforts that the Chinese had made by trying to normalize the relation, twice the Chinese foreign minister has come, once the Chinese defense minister has come. As far as India is concerned, and well articulated by the external affairs minister Jai Shankar himself, repeatedly he has said that there will be no peace between India and China if there is no peace on the line of actual control. That means the border issue now is central to normalization of relations between India and China, despite the fact that a formula for the peace has already been signed by Jai Shankar, and that was signed on the 10th of September 2020 as a joint statement in Moscow, where Jai Shankar signed that statement along with his then counterpart Wang Yi of China. It lays out the conditions for peace, the terms for peace, everything is there. But India obviously does not want to normalize relations for the key reason that now it has moved into the American orbit. Now, the last thing I want to say is about BRICS. The BRICS, as I said, complements the SCO. They all, the structures, they complement one another. As far as BRICS is concerned, the summit is to be held in August next month in South Africa, Johannesburg. And the key issue there is, which was articulated now by Xi Jinping, that there is a need for a local currency. And he's already spoken about a new development bank could be created, where perhaps over a period of time, right now the countries which are trading, the BRICS countries, they could trade in their local currencies, but eventually there could be the digital currency which could be routed through the new bank, so that you don't displace, you replace the dollar. That means the sanctions of the Americans, which is their strength, that gets diminished. And there are a lot of countries which want to join both the SCO and the BRICS. And the Chinese and the Russians are very happy about it, but the Indians are not. Because India's influence then, whatever it has in the BRICS, it will listen if there are more and more countries that join. And in fact, Jai Shankar has already said that, look, he is perhaps not in favor of this new bank also. So what I am saying is that the prospect of, first of all, let's see, the prospect of China-US relations improving are minuscule, deserves another video which I'll do. And India-China relations, I do not see improving at all under Prime Minister Modi's government. And India-Pakistan relations are already in the doghouse. So the point here is that what will China do? How long will China accept India as a member there in the SCO is a question. The point I am making is a balancing act will become very difficult for India with each passing day, and there are other implications as well which perhaps people can think about. Thank you.